Those watching on the live on the web, we're delighted to have you all gathered here together. We are about to launch into an extremely important subject, but before we do that launch, I'd like to just give you a bit of background about the Wilson Center for those that are new to us. Wilson Center was established by the Congress in 1968 as a living memorial to our 28th president. As you may know, Woodrow Wilson was the only president to have had a PhD. So when Congress created the Living Memorial, they gave us the assignment of bringing together both sides of his life. The people doing the best thinking on public policy, the most revolutionary thinking on public policy, together with the people here around the country and increasingly around the world that are actually making or influencing that policy. And it's very much in that spirit that we have assembled this talented panel here. I feel I have to use that oft-used Washington phrase quoting President Kennedy, who when he gathered his cabinet together said, "Not since Thomas Jefferson dined alone had there been so much talent gathered in one place." And I think we could apply that phrase to this group here, who are not only talented, but really thinking about how to change the future. The focus today is really the next generation of Earth system education. And each of these speakers has a different angle, a different experience, but all around that general subject of geoscience and how to make it accessible to the next generation of thinkers and leaders. Let me introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak, and I'm going to be brief because you do have their bios in front of you. To your right and to my immediate left is John Moore. John's an old friend. Got to know him when he was an Einstein Fellow. I think it was 2009, 2010 class. Mm-hmm. He was one of a very select group of people who have that Einstein accolade on their resume. I've always dreamed of having an Einstein, and when I met with the group, said I'd even settle for a Newton, but John is currently, he has this whole list of honors that he's garnered. He has taught geoscience and remote sensing, and he is now, interestingly enough, he's the executive director for the American Council of STEM Educators, which is a new group that is forming and rapidly growing. He's currently the director for geoscience, STEM education at the Palmyra Cove Nature Park and Environmental Discovery Center. Next speaker will be Marcia Barton, who is to my right, to your left. Marcia is a current Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow, and she's at the Directorate for Geoscience at NSF. She also has a long list of accolades, including participating in the Toyota International Teacher Program to the Galapagos Islands. Yeah. I'm more than a little jealous. That sounds a fascinating experience. The next speaker will be Vicki Gorman. Vicki is to Marcia's right. Vicki currently is a 7th grade science teacher. This is so often middle school where people say they start to lose the interest in math and science. So it's a critical bridge from today to what we hope is tomorrow. And she came through the alternative teaching route. She was a field artillery officer in the United States Army. So Kevin, who I'll introduce in a minute, was saying, what if we have a little fisticuffs break out? Well, I'm not worried about it now that I have an artillery officer to my right. Next to speak will be Peter. Peter Dorothy, is that how do you say Dorothy? Dorothy. Peter Dorothy. He is the National Earth Science Teacher Association, that group. He's the Eastern Regional Director. He has a background in physics as well as geoscience. He is, again, all of these people have gotten such a long list of awards. I can't really barely take the time to read them all. After Peter, will be followed by Kevin Simmons, another old friend from the 2009-2010 Einstein Distinguished Educator Scholars Fellows class. Kevin has been very active in teaching space science, geoscience, started an after-school program which has grown into a company now with young people. He really is just an extraordinary talent. And finally, we're delighted to welcome Jim Kang, who is to John Moore's left and Kevin's right. Jen is a professor, assistant professor at the Military Academy. He is a specialist in aerospace engineering and will bring that added talent to bear in today's discussion. I've asked each of our participants to speak for between 5 and 7 minutes, and then to have some crosstalk, if that seems appropriate, where they might want to question each other and spell out some added insights. So, John, let me turn the floor over to you to start us off.
Thank you, Kent. And first of all, thank you for all being here, but I also want to say Happy Earth Day to everybody. That's we picked today. Kent was able to accommodate us. I think that's a nice twist. So I want to say, first of all, I don't know how many of you, well, looking at the audience, or some of you were not alive, perhaps, but on April 22nd, 1970, I know where I was. I was a junior in high school, and probably the only day in my K-12 experience that I was allowed by my mom to take the day off. I went to Philadelphia to participate in Earth Day. So it's been a long time coming. As Kent mentioned, I ended up having to do my college work in environmental science and became a teacher of that. So these little events, you never know what's going to come out of them. So I wanted to kind of start us off, and you're going to see a theme come through everybody. We're going to talk about teacher leadership. We're going to talk about some opportunities, maybe some obstacles, and give you some examples, and then we'll get that out there, and then we can have questions or have further discussion. So kind of the educational directives of where a lot of the work that we're doing together came from was the PCAST report, Prepare and Inspire, that was released a few years back. And in that discussion was, out of that discussion, I should say, came the call for creating a STEM Master Teacher Corps. So as part of that, I participated in one of the PCAST meetings in giving a public comment, which, if some of you are familiar with that, it's 2 minutes, 2 minutes only. And Dr. Lander, the co-chair, engaged me in about a 2-minute further discussion, and that's on tape, by the way, in the PCAST archives. But basically, we were talking about GeoSTEM, or getting the geosciences and the earth science promoted in the United States. And he was asking me, so what's stopping you, basically, paraphrase it quickly. But it ended with, what would it take, why don't you go get like 10 geoscience educators, and let's start putting these things together and let us know how, what we can do for you. I was basically just saying, we need some help. So he, as his words, pushed it back to me and said, go get some of your friends, basically, and let us know what's going on. So I took his advice, and so here are my friends, and we're here today at there. So we'll remind. I'm sure he will have forgotten that, but as I said, it's on tape on the White House server, so we won't let him forget that discussion. But so that's one thing. The next generation science standards were out. I think it was just last week. Time's going by quick. And so there's a couple opportunities, we're saying. So it's the national STEM education discussion and the next generation science discussion. So when we look at the geosciences and the earth science, looking at Earth as a system, these are two huge opportunities for us to have a little bit of reform and influence in what's going to translate and end up being taught in schools. So that's kind of the basic where we came from. One of the things that we're working on in the Council for STEM Educators is this, and Kent is well familiar with this term, developing the teacher's voice. So the basic premise that I'm going to lay out there, and you'll hear from these other folks, is The Einstein Fellows have as their little tag item putting policy into practice. And so we're at a point where I think maybe we can look at this in a different light, and that's putting practice in the policy. So right now, some of the initiatives in the STEM is we need STEM education, it's the STEM Master Core discussion, is we need to generate these master STEM teachers. I say to you, and we're going to hopefully make the case this afternoon, that they are already out there in the United States. We do not, we just need to go out into the weeds, flush them out, get them together, and we have answers to a lot of the problems. People that are working in the related geosciences fields know this. Two of the programs we'll talk about later, the American Meteorological Society's Data Stream Project. There are thousands of teachers across the country that have already engaged in professional development. The GLOBE program, there are thousands of people, literally multiple thousands of people globally involved in this program. And so these are teacher-centered programs, and so we're going to hear a little bit from people down the line about how they've participated in those things and where that has led to teacher leadership. And then following on this end of the table with Kevin and Jin, we'll be talking a little bit about opening the curtain and seeing a taste into what the future is, and as we embark in this new era of policy, what is possibly on the table.
Thank you, John, very much. Marcia?
I'm going to steal your
Oh,
microphone.
please do. This one's not working.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I wanted to follow up a little bit from what John had to say and go back to the next generation science standards, or as we educators like to call them, NGSS, in case you were wondering. And now, these standards were just released last week, and these standards have really the opportunity to transform how we teach science in this country. And because right now we teach science as if biology was separate from chemistry, was separate from physics, was separate from the space, and was separate from the earth. Well, life is not like that. Life is a unity. And really the goal of these next generation science standards is to teach an integrated science so that the biology, chemistry, physics, earth and space sciences are actually all integrated together. And in the best of worlds, we would have science year 1, science year 2, science year 3. Well, it's going to take us a little while to get there, but there's a real opportunity there. And the opportunity also exists is because our current standards, our current science standards are written as pretty much as biology, physics, and chemistry standards, and earth science, earth and space. Well, in this next generation science standards, it's called the life sciences, the physical sciences, which is chemistry and physics combined, and then now for the first time, Earth systems science can stand up and say, I'm at the table. Earth and space science are elevated to the realm of the other sciences. So we have these 3 major strands in the disciplinary core ideas, and earth and space are right up there. So this is a huge opportunity for the geosciences. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier in the day. One of the challenges for us in the geosciences will be taking advantage of that as we move towards implementation of the next generation science standards. How is that going to happen? Who's going to train that next generation of earth science, earth and space science teachers? I wanted to talk a little bit too about, although I think I'm preaching to the choir, why is geoscience relevant to our lives? I'm an environmental science teacher in Santa Fe, New Mexico. My student population is about 70% Hispanic, Latino, Latina. And we're not a high-achieving school. Our dropout rate wavers between 35 and 40%. And so a group of teachers, myself included, have gotten together to look at, well, what could we do about this? And so one of the things that we would like to do is to start an academy for innovation and sustainability using the geosciences and combining with engineering as the basic hooks to get students engaged. And geosciences are perfect for engaging students. And Again, I don't think I need to really tell you all the reasons why geoscience is so interesting, but it is because we have right now, and we're seeing more of these, the extreme weather events. So if the weather and the climate hasn't gotten your attention yet, I don't know what to say. In New Mexico, we have fires and droughts. On the East Coast, we just had, in recent history, Superstorm Sandy. And the understanding the geosciences is pretty basic to actually being able to live in a kind of a sane way on this planet. And I think our young people are really interested in living in an environmentally friendly way, and the geosciences can help in that. And on another tack, there are tremendous job opportunities in the geosciences as this generation of geoscientists moves towards retirement. We had a large wave of geoscientists in the baby boomer generation, and then there was a lull, but those geoscientists will now be retiring. And there are also a lot more careers in the geosciences that are coming into demand, such as hydrologists, meteorologists, fire management, watershed management, along with the traditional geoscience careers in the extractive industries. So the geosciences, the environmental science, is a cornerstone for our new academy. And students are interested in this. And we get to be about 2 weeks into my course in environmental science, where we've covered some of the basics, state of the world. And they raise their hand and they say, "Miss Barton," and what? And they're like, "Well, how come we don't already know this? You know, why isn't anybody telling us? Why isn't anybody else telling us what's going on in our world in the same way that you're describing it?" And I'm like, "Well, you know, I don't really know. You know, I don't really know. I don't have an answer for you." So it takes about another 2 weeks before they go, "Well, Miss Barton." I'm like, "Yeah." They go like, "We're kind of screwed, aren't we?" And I'm like, well, you know, not yet, but we're close, you know, unless we do something. And the geosciences is that arena where students feel like they can move into and really make a difference. So because of this, because of the relevance and authenticity of the geosciences, and because of the next generation science emphasis on earth and space science, when you couple those two things with President Obama's initiative to have 100,000 new STEM educators in this country, I say make 30,000 of those earth and space system science teachers. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Marcia. That's
Yeah.
great. Vicki?
Thank you. Let me get my tasks out of the way. I was given a task by my 7th graders that I had to wish everybody a happy Earth Day today. So happy Earth Day from Team 72 Science at Medford Memorial Middle School in New Jersey. So having said that, I'm here today to talk to you about a program that will be starting at our school next year. And it's a program that probably would not have gotten started unless 2 students approached me last fall with a flyer that said, "You can win $5,000 for your school." And the 2 young ladies came up to me and said, "Mrs. Gorman, can we do this?" And I said, "Well, we can do anything." And they said, "Well, let's do this. This would really be fun." So I set down 2 major parameters on the brainstorming session we had for the program. Number 1 was that they think big, because I find, especially having come from the Army background, and I also have an international horse business, coming from that sort of background, people, I've always thought big. I've always thought long term. I've always thought, what can we do, not what can't we do? And I wanted these 2 young ladies to also think that way. And first they started off with saying, well, maybe we'll make a little garden, or maybe we'll do this or that. And I kept on saying, think bigger, think bigger. So we came up with a program called the CSEP, which in a second I'll explain to you. And we submitted our entry, and I'm happy to say that we did win the $5,000. And my life has changed because of these two students, and I believe their life has changed as well. And what I'm hoping is that we can also change the lives of other students and other teachers by getting them to think out of the box and take chances. So I just want to take a quick opportunity to review our program with you. As I said before, it's CSEP, which stands for, I can do this myself. Technology is wonderful. It stands for Citizen Science Education Program. Now, the unique thing about our Citizen Science Education Program is that it is going to be run by middle school students. However, we had to think of a way to make this not only meaningful to the community, but to the students as well. And I want you to notice in the upper right-hand corner, we talk about 21st century workforce skills. For me, this is one of the most important things. I can teach science to a student, someone can teach math to a student, but unless they are marketable when they get out of college, all that knowledge goes to waste. Students need to learn how to speak in public, how to communicate effectively in writing, work in small collaborative groups, be able to speak on the phone as well as write the email. And they need to be leaders. And unfortunately, we don't develop that leadership quality in students until it's too late. I was reading a report from a global economy, I guess it was a meeting or a conference in the Middle East that happened a few weeks ago. And the key was, let's get started even when these students are 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. Now, I realize you wouldn't have such a challenging program then, but I think that at a minimum, we need to start in middle school to develop these workforce skills so that they become innate and the students own them by the time that they're adults. So, as I said before, it's a program designed, implemented, created by middle school students. It's for our community, tailored for our community and its residents. And our is the key word here. I'm hoping that this becomes a template for other communities. So all teachers have to do is take this program, tailor it to their community, and then run with it. The purpose of the community is to increase the scientific literacy of our citizens. Marcia was talking about Superstorm Sandy. If you ask any New Jerseyan, you would probably come out to about 40% of the population not realizing that a hurricane of that magnitude or a storm of that magnitude could have hit us that far north. We've had earthquakes. We live on top of one of the most prolific aquifer systems in the nation, and yet people don't understand this. This is something that they need to know, not only to make good decisions about their lives, but also to make good political decisions and good decisions going forth for their family as well. The other thing there you see is Weather Ready Nation Network, and this is a NOAA initiative. John can speak more to this if anybody has questions, but basically we want our community to be able to be smart enough to understand what that weatherman is talking about, or to understand if someone says evacuate, that it is time to evacuate. So we're hoping that our citizen science education program ties us in to the Weather Ready Nation Network as well. Of course, I spoke already about the 21st century workforce skills. The students will create a website, which will be a one-stop shop of science facts tailored to our community for the what I call the 8 to 80 crowd, although my mom at almost 98 would take some umbrage with that. Present lectures. We're going to have the kids actually go out into the community and present lectures to anyone and everyone, to church groups, to 4-H groups, to the Chamber of Commerce, to the Board of Education, and not only get the experience themselves, but also be able to educate the community in a way that they haven't been educated before. You can see some other things. We'll coordinate campaigns with local fire, police, and emergency management, arrange for scientists to visit our community, and also to manage a budget. This has to be tied into STEM, so we want students to continue with their own science education. We're going to work with what's called a weather bug station. It is, we've just upgraded with the $5,000 we won. We upgraded the system to include lightning sensor technology so that we can send push notifications on smart devices to members of our community to let them know when lightning is within 10 miles of our radius. We're going to become members of the GLOBE program, and John will speak more about that later. And also the students will be able to research new information for the website and also for their presentations. Last but not least, the program emphasizes the geosciences because, as my students tell me every year, Mrs. Gorman, why do we study anything except geosciences? Because the geosciences contain the chemistry, the physics, the biology, and it makes it so much more interesting when we can take all those facts and apply it to our real lives. That's what's really important. We also, of course, gain focus from the next generation science standards, NSF, NOAA, AMS goals and vision. You can see going down, and then, of course, the global economy and where our workforce needs to be within the next, soon, 5 years, 6 years, and on down the line. So that's it. That's the exciting things that are happening in schools. I hope that it catches on and we sort of become a chain reaction of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. I hope you'll take a happy Earth Day back to that 7th grade of yours.
I will. They'll be excited.
Peter Dorothy.
Yes, I'm Peter Dorothy. I'm the Geospatial Technologies teacher at the Burlington County Institute of Technology in Medford, New Jersey. I teach the Geospatial Tech as well as the Earth Science and Physics. And just a few things I wanted to mention, and it dovetailed off of what Marcia was talking about with the biology, the chemistry, the physics. Based on that, the fact that they are lab courses that colleges and universities are looking for, that schools teach, and that earth science tends to be a course that is a non-lab course by tradition for a lot of schools. It's not looked at as a lab science course. This has changed in my school. A couple of things have come up. One, in that teaching geospatial technologies, of course, involves using GPS, GIS, remote sensing, using those skills and technologies across various sectors, private industry, public industry, but also, as many of you are aware, is used extensively in earth science research, all the earth sciences, especially remote sensing and real-time data that really didn't exist for the public, at least until relatively recently. The kind of data that was only available to scientists, now that data is available to just about anybody with internet online access. Hence, when I began teaching earth science, I introduced a remote sensing lab. What happened was that in geospatial technologies, that career major that I'm still teaching, actually it's the last year that I'm teaching this career major. It's actually closing down. It's no longer being offered next year simply due to enrollment and budget cuts and things of that nature. So those technologies that the kids were introduced to, how do I now introduce those technologies into the earth science and into the physics? So earth science created a remote sensing lab. Now, with the geospatial students, we had a lot of computers because you can't do GIS without the computers. But my shop is closing down, and a new shop actually began, law enforcement and public safety. That began, they have a lot of computers. I was no longer put in that classroom. I was put in another classroom without any computers. So the challenge was finding the technologies, finding the resources to get a remote sensing lab together. But the point is, remote sensing lab, it's a laboratory. And it's a laboratory of using real-time data, real-time or near real-time satellite images to do the same kind of scientific work that physics, chemistry, and biology students can do in a lab classroom. With the kids that I'm teaching right now, because it's a CTE school, they go into the school with different career expectations. The school students go there to take auto mechanics or culinary arts, cosmetology, veterinary assistants. So they already have their careers that they want to do. So the challenge for science teachers in my school is, how do we make science relevant to their life? And of course, being in New Jersey, there's plenty of opportunities to discuss earth science that's related to New Jersey itself. And of course, we all know last year with Hurricane Sandy, that was mentioned a couple times already. So teaching the physics of Hurricane Sandy, for example, with my physics students has been incredible. I want to back up just a moment, where I mentioned that I use GIS and the remote sensing with the earth science kids. At the same time, that class is also closing down because of state requirements. Earth science is no longer being offered next year to the science to the students. So now I'm teaching pretty much all physics. So the idea now is to take those technologies that the earth science kids are using now, have the physics kids use them. And again, one of the projects that the kids are working on is approximating the internal energy of a tropical cyclone. And prior to what we were doing before, and you can find this online, is approximating the hurricane as a cylinder and getting the volume and things like that. And the kids were working on using that model. But now with satellite images, we're doing a different model. And so they're getting into image analysis with ImageJ, and it's exciting for them. So that's kind of how I'm using those technologies in the classes that I'm teaching. And to just dovetail off with what Vicki was saying about creating a weather-ready nation. And one of the things I wanted to really get across to my students when we talked about Hurricane Sandy, we talked about energies, is that, you compare the energy of a tropical cyclone to the energy of a hurricane. Well, they could both be the same. It's just structure. It's how that energy is distributed. But, when I ask my kids, look, if a hurricane starts off at Category 2 and 2 days later it's forecasted to be a tropical storm, what goes on in people's heads when it comes to evacuations? Do they take it as seriously? Hurricane versus storm. Well, we all go through storms. So they may hear that word tropical storm. They may not take it as seriously. But the point is that the energies are still there, just distributed differently. And so, by doing the physics of hurricanes, kids come to appreciate that. So that's pretty much I have to say.
Well, thank you, Peter, very much. John, you wanted to have an added thought?
Yeah, so we're going to maybe gather these thoughts. What we wanted to do in this first section was show you what's going on with teachers. By the way, all of us that are teachers, this is just for policy makers' notes, we've all come to teaching through alternate routes. So that's something to think about. We were meeting just before this over at the NSF talking about obstacles and opportunities to implement innovation. And so these programs that Vicki and Pete talked about are generated by their own will, if you will, and brought into reality by almost forcing the issue. So coming back to the topic, and before we go to Kevin and Jin, is looking at the next generation science standards, just particularly as it relates to our group and the Earth systems science folks. So most people are aware by now that for the first time we have a reason to go forth into the schools and do this because it's part of the next generation science standards. Things like societal issues as well as scientific, like climate education and sustainability and energy sources are all part of this. And so what we're seeing as experienced educators, I'm kind of sitting back and waiting for this tsunami to hit as far as in terms of where are we going to find these resources, where are we going to find these teachers. Pete just mentioned what in earth science cut out of his school. That's not uncommon. It's happening all over the place. I spent a long time trying to get environmental science into the schools, back 25 years ago, and still it's mediocre success. So we have the marching orders. One thing I'd like to point out as well is, and Vicki was talking about this, is the students come to class asking those questions, which is what we want them to do. And I would say, I haven't done a physical count, but I'm willing to guess that in the last year's news cycle, maybe I'll guess at 300 out of 365 days, there's a story about a tornado, a hurricane, a wildfire, a tsunami, a Gulf oil spill, a climate issue, this, that, and the other thing, open space. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. Yet, as a nation, people come, well, I didn't know. Like you were saying, why don't we know these things? Well, where were you ever taught? People say, oh, how can you live in New Jersey and you don't know? Well, as Pete said, most people are not aware. They think hurricanes are Florida and Louisiana and Texas and those places. They don't come to New Jersey. So there's this confusion over how to react. So for our community, we have, I think, a unique time in history between the STEM discussions and the next generation science standards to say, and we're going to be invited to the table, as Marcia said, to have these discussions, and it's a really small window, I think. If you're not familiar with the K-12 teaching community, once the next generation science standards are implemented, I know for sure I will be out fishing, not sitting here at a panel at the Wilson Center. It will be well beyond my career. Think about this for some of the younger people watching. The first science standards were introduced in 1996. They're just barely implemented in the schools now. See what I'm saying? So it's maybe Vicky's students that are going to address the next generation. So that's where we are. Now, to make the transition over, as we live in another unique time. And this is something that's just, I just look at it and say, why don't people see these things? So you look at the existing infrastructure, and this is an NSF word, leveraging your resources. And particularly in times when the money's short, the budgets are being cut, we need to start thinking more seriously about this. But in the field of geosciences, in the remote sensing area, we have airplanes, we have ships, we have submarines, we have national ecological remote sensors, we have satellites, we have NASA and NOAA and all those things that are a tremendous infrastructure, probably into the billions of dollars that have already been spent where that data is out there. So when we talk about bringing it into the schools in the age of technology, and we're going to have a STEM discussion, technology, engineering, and math, then why aren't we looking at some of these resources? There are people out there that would love to get it into schools. So the first question is, well, where? Where would that fit into the schools? And so you hear Pete's testimony. You just found out last week, Earth Science gone. So the answer to that, I told him before, that's what you get for having a physics certification, because they'll move that out, and they need him as a physics teacher more than they need him as an earth science teacher. But he's smart enough to outsmart them on that, so he'll bring it in there. But so there's where we're going. So let's look at the future for a second, and that's what these two colleagues of mine are going to speak about. So we're looking at remote sensing and using satellite information. This is decades old, but maybe new for the first time for the nation to hear in terms of these standards. But we're well beyond using the data. We have moved, and this is not science fiction. This is not something that's coming in the future. This is happening as we speak. And that's the introduction of some of the newest technology, and they are called CubeSats, and they're going to explain what that is. But here's the setup for them. The transition is not only can students learn to use the data, but students have now throughout Europe, Thomas Jefferson High School, right across the river here, is on the flight agenda. They have built one, so high school students are building flight-ready spacecraft, launching them, and getting the data back. Now, I'll loop discussion all the way back to the prepare and inspire words. And I'm saying, as a geoscientist, if a kid's working on building a satellite, working with scientists, professors like Jin, launching a satellite, getting data back, if that doesn't prepare and inspire them, then I give up, quite frankly. So with that, Kevin can take over from there.
Thanks, John. John and Marcia and others mentioned about the prevalence of, let's say, weather in the news. And I just want to point out a couple of quick things. In the news in the last couple of days, the stories at the top of my mind, the Antares launch, which was Orbital's new rocket that they're going to demonstrate that they can deliver cargo to the shuttle. So they had a successful launch. And even though they put a dummy mass into orbit as their first test, they also launched secondary payloads, which were CubeSats. And these are small form factors that are 10 centimeters on a side. And Jen will tell you about some of the specifics of that. Also in the news, I remember hearing that the Mississippi River is about to crest, I guess, for the spring thaws. And people are concerned, obviously, about flooding and whatnot. And we get a lot of interesting data, obviously, from our satellites. And then I was reminded of last spring, I had to go to Iowa State for work. And at that, I'm in the hotel, and I'm flipping through all the local channels, and it's they're prognosticating crop yields based on satellite imagery, in the springtime, when based on the weather data, when's the last freeze and the thaws and the temperatures, and when the farmers are putting those seeds in the ground, they're already predicting based on satellite imagery what they expect the yield to be on the corn that year. I thought that was fascinating use of and real world. So the CubeSat, that's my one takeaway, is that one word CubeSat, and Jen's going to elaborate on it. Backing up just a small bit, I am one of those non-traditional teachers. I worked in research labs. My degrees are in chemistry and biochemistry. I worked in research labs in Research Triangle Park and at universities to work my way through school, between that and the Army. So I have some military experience, infantry officer, and worked in labs. And then I also worked in industry before I became a teacher. So I'm what you call an enthusiastic generalist. Okay. I am truly a master of nothing, but I'm very passionate about equipping kids to chase after what they're excited about. First of all, we have to show them some things that are worth being excited about, and then equip them to go chase their dreams. To that end, I started a company. When I finally did become a teacher, I wanted to build spaceflight hardware with high school kids, thinking that's a good thing to hook kids into good-paying jobs. We met with Northrop Grumman, which had a facility unrelated to aerospace. They made missiles, I think, down the road. I was from Florida, teacher in Florida. And we met with Northrop Grumman. We made a great pitch for, we wanted to build a mid-deck locker, grow bone cells, study osteoporosis in space, study microgravity-induced bone loss, which is a great analog for osteoporosis here on Earth. And the Northrop Grumman lady, nice lady, she looked at me and said, "Oh, we can't go near this. We're not going to help you. You should just start your own company." So I thought, okay. So we started a corporation. It was a nonprofit, but it was staffed almost entirely by students and a couple of teachers. And then we would write grants. And what was interesting is John talks about how do you inspire kids. I allowed the kids to pick which area of the company they wanted to serve. And so we broke the company into biology, engineering, and then the catch-all for everyone else was marketing, because we wanted to grow cells. We wanted to create a bioreactor. So we needed kids to understand what were the cells doing, what do we want to accomplish with the experiment. Then the engineering was a natural place. A lot of the guys wanted to gravitate to engineering because they're kinesthetic. They want to turn wrenches and get their hands on pumps and study fluid flow, things like that. But then there was another group of kids that not necessarily, they wanted to be involved, but they weren't want to be engineers or want to be life scientists. So they became the marketing group. And what was interesting is I had this wonderful young kid, and I mentioned her specifically, and you'll see why. She did not want to do the hardcore science, but she was passionate about being involved with the company. So when the congressman would come and visit our little school, our little poor school, private school, she would escort the congressman around and she would do the press conferences. She would lead the press conferences, and we would invite the reporters. And it was a great way for her to scratch the edge of being involved with a company without the other. The reason I mention her is she Facebooked me yesterday because she's about to graduate and become a teacher, and she wants to apply to the school that I last taught at. So that's a nice conclusion to a story of a kid who wasn't sure how they wanted to be involved. but found a way. So CubeSats, that's still the one takeaway. These small satellites are incredibly powerful tools, not only to provide data for research and scientists, but they are inspiration. These CubeSats, these form factors will allow kids to, number one, put the engineering method into practice. They can put the engineering method, which is much different than the scientific method. It's very iterative, it's very hands-on, and I think in high school we don't give kids a chance to see what systems engineering is like or see the big picture. You know, in biology we study all the systems of the body, but they have to be integrated and work well together for us to be healthy. A CubeSat provides a wonderful way for kids to be introduced to systems engineering and all the subsystems involved with a real-life spacecraft minus the environmental control and the life support. So with the CubeSat, as Kent mentioned, I was a fellow for 2 years, and my assignment, the office to which I was assigned in engineering, works on public-private partnerships. They actually kept me on as an analyst. And what I've done with John, Jen, and some others is we've initiated an effort to help these high school kids and hopefully teachers and junior high kids be introduced to the CubeSat model as a way to inspire them and to help push some kids towards some STEM careers. I've heard this said, and I want to believe it, there are no low-paying jobs in aerospace. Aerospace, it is one of the few sectors in the U.S. economy where we have a massive trade surplus. Now, we're not here to debate public policy about our satellite industry, but it's still a great place for Americans to, we can lead the way. Now, with the CubeSats, I was on the Metro where I do some great thinking. You know, when you get to sit down and it's cool before it gets hot in the summer.
There are lots of delays to give you added time.
That's right. I made a little spider diagram in my mind. So if you could imagine a spider diagram with 3 axes, the CubeSats enable you, they enable students to have access to both software and hardware. So they learn about the actual building of the system. And if you, as John mentioned, the kids at Thomas Jefferson, and there's a group in Florida that have built a CubeSat that's going to be manifested soon. And all around the country, these kids learn to program. So imagine FIRST Robotics, but instead of building toys that beat each other up, you're building spacecraft articles that, when launched, can send data back to Earth that would give access, that allow teachers and students access to that data. So that's the Blue Cube concept that some of us are working on. And Blue Cube simply is an acronym for Build, Launch, Utilize to Educate using CubeSats. So on one axis of the spider diagram, we have hardware and software. On another axis, we have experiential and theoretical. Jen could tell you about his balloon sats that he and John have worked with, where within a week, students or teachers, they could build, and in Florida they do quite a few of these. They'll build a small balloon sat, which I refer to as the poor man's CubeSat or poor man's satellite, where the most expensive component of your hardware a lot of times is the helium to go in the balloon. And you've probably seen the American Express commercial where they build the balloon and they take the images of the curvature of the Earth. It's even in our commercials. And the third axis, and I think it's very important and it relates to the GeoSTEM and geosciences, is on one end of the axis we have the collection and the capture of data, especially with, as Peter mentioned, remote Earth sensing. And at the other end of that axis we have the usage of this data, or the utilization, the GIS. And as you know, big data and analytics that's just exploding now. I would be fascinated to see all the algorithms that were used with all the facial recognition with this recent event with the marathon. All the imagery that was given to the law enforcement and how they were able to comb through and identify, and that's just very fascinating. But that's all analytics. CubeSats provide teachers and students access to this large amount of data that they can do their own research, their own unique research. So that's my sort of the spider diagram. We have hardware and software, we have experiential and theoretical, and we have the collection of data where your engineers are building sensors, and we have the usage of that data, which we can engage millions of kids like that. So my takeaway for you guys is CubeSats. Very good, CubeSats.
Kevin, can people get the outline of that program online?
Yes. We're working on I'm actually working on the web page currently, but I'm going to point you to John's email. That's going to be, John is our primary point of contact. John, where John is the usage of data, my passion is to see these built. And we do have, there are a lot of places, I should say, around the country. University of Florida, for instance, they're manifested with something called SwampSat. So if you're familiar with the Florida Gators, it's a very fitting name. But there are many university programs. If you will simply put CubeSat into your search window, you will be amazed at what you see. I know NASA is going to fund at least, I'm going to say 48 or 64 small sats in the next few years. And there's a program called ELANA, E-L-A-N-A. That's a NASA-sponsored program for CubeSats. I want to use, and John and I and Jen and others, we want to use the CubeSats to inspire teachers and equip them and to equip their students. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jen.
Jen, before you start, I think I may have misintroduced you, associated you with the Military Academy. He's actually
Go Army.
aerospace engineering professor at the U.S. Naval Academy.
Best of the military academies. Thank you. So let me start off by describing what a CubeSat is and how it could be utilized, and then let me go back to sort of the motivation factor of using the CubeSat. So this is the outer skin of a CubeSat, sitting right here. It's student-built solar panels that go on the outside of a CubeSat. So this is an actual full size of what a CubeSat will be. And immediately you'll notice that it's quite small and manageable size. And the reason why we like this form factor is because the entire satellite can be designed and built and launched within a couple of years. So our motto is we launch the satellites while students are still students, and which has not been the traditional way the satellites were developed before. What's so wonderful about the CubeSat is, what differentiates it from the other satellites is that it follows a standard form factor, a standard way of being developed and launched, tested, such that it makes it much easier for the schools, even the schools that are starting out, to be able to get into the program, build their first CubeSat, and then launch into space. If you were to build your own satellite, it will take many years, different things to consider, and getting it manifested on a rocket to get it launched into space will be a big deal, really hard to do. Whereas if you have this CubeSat already established standards, you just follow the standards, and you have opportunities to get a lot of help from other entities in the community. NASA is providing lots of free launches, so your operation cost is going way down, and it saves you a lot of paperwork and documentations that's required for if you're to have normal launches. So it's a great educational and scientific tool to be used for schools, universities, and as John mentioned, some of the high schools are already getting involved in this program. Our U.S. Naval Academy satellite, the next satellite is going up sometime at the end of the year, and we're flying together with a high school payload, high school CubeSat. So there's a lot of interest. And the thing about CubeSat is that how it could be scaled back to the pre-college level is once you have a standard set, once you build the first unit, you could leverage the same unit and just change your payload, the scientific package, to get the different data that you might want. So one example would be to work with the university at the beginning to build a first unit satellite. And if you want to get some pictures of the clouds, maybe you put a camera on it. The next time around, keep everything the same and just change that camera payload. And maybe if you want to measure the lightning frequencies at a certain region, you could do that too. So it might sound like a difficult thing to do when you think about satellites, but because there are so many other entities that's done this before, and there's so much resource available, so much help, and all you need to do is just get the first unit out the door. It's very doable at a high school level, as can be seen from other high schools already participating in the program. When I think of STEM education, I see two factors that are quite important. One is motivation, and the other one, one is motivation, the other one is hands-on experience. And something like this, I think, is a perfect venue for providing both to the students who are involved. If you sort of imagine giving your students a project, maybe printed out data from another satellite flight, give it to students, say, hey, here's the data, let's do some science project. Maybe some interest there. If you get a printed out data with a NASA logo stamped on it and saying, hey, this came from NASA, hey, do you want to play with this data? Different response. If the students get to design their own payload, own scientific package, build it with their friends, and launch it into space and get the data back that they designed to get, I believe that will be sort of the ultimate motivation they could possibly have. Pete mentioned about getting real-time satellite data and interpreting that, and how that could be a wonderful program. Having to design your own satellite and getting that launched puts that extra depth to the education. You have to really know your system and really know what you want and have a good understanding of the science before you could formulate your own problem. The example I use is if a room full of kids and you're like, who wants to play board games? And everyone might be excited. And then if you put out just one board game, Scrabble, and say, hey, go at it, maybe you lose half the room. Having this kind of project where the students can get involved at multiple tiers, starting from maybe design. Some people just want to come up with a formulation of the problem, what they want to study. Some people just want to play with gluing things together and bolting things on together. That's good too. Some people just want to program. Some people just want to get the data and interpret the data and work on the science part. A project like a CubeSat project will involve all of that at multiple levels, so that the students who are interested in different parts, but generally interested in STEM or geoscience, can get involved. And you will be covering the broader audience, and at the same time, there's the team building experience, and maybe they'll catch on to different aspects of STEM education, STEM programs that they like, and develop that further. So in that sense, I believe the CubeSat is very plausible at multiple levels of education, and also a very beneficial, and sort of encompasses all different aspects of the STEM education that we're trying to provide for our students.
So thank you, Jen. It's almost as if you're all taking the Earth and Earth science as a massive opportunity for project-based learning.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems to me, at least I'm now generalizing from my own experience with 3 children, that they are natural scientists when they're very young. How does this work? How, even questions that might involve a bit of engineering. Where's the money come from? Where's the gasoline come from? Which can open up all kinds of questions. You stressed motivation. And John, I remember earlier you were talking about having students who were not particularly interested in either math or science, but would be doing an internship with a company, and suddenly they'd say, oh, I have to reprogram that machine tool. It suddenly showed the practical importance. And I think the CubeSat program, as you described it, Kevin and Jen, has very much that kind of element. It doesn't make me think very much of FIRST Robotics, which has the same idea, where you've got a particular problem that you've got to solve. In this case, to build a robot to play a game in partnership with 2 other robots. You have team-based learning. You've got an appreciation for different skills that are complementary. You're inspired by solving the problem. Suddenly the math and science, even if you're interested in them to begin with, seem much more real. So I think this program, taking advantage of the Earth as that massive project-based learning, will be very complementary in terms of the motivation leading to the hands-on, and the hands-on, I think, adding to the motivation. Before, I know you want to have some crosstalk here before we go to questions, and before you do that, I wanted to be sure and introduce Liz White. Liz, if you'd stand up and wave to everybody. This would not have happened today without Liz's good offices and coordination and so forth, and she's been a terrific, relatively new member here at the Wilson Center. She's a returned Peace Corps volunteer, had a lot of hands-on experience and many challenges in that context. John, why don't I turn it over to you if you wanted to have a little crosstalk, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, maybe to bring this back to Earth, no pun intended, but to look at the
With the Naval Academy,
with the
you should
Naval
be talking
Academy,
about
right.
the oceans.
We
too.
are. One of the other problems that we need to address, I mentioned before about I see this as a unique window of opportunity. So we kind of parallel, and these are things that Ken has hosted the fellows here before, talking about teacher leadership, how do things happen in the K-12 community. And it is about that. It's about, teacher leaders and how do we develop teacher leaders. So this panel, most of us are from New Jersey. I lobbied Kent and I said, hey, it's the Woodrow Wilson Center. Come on, you have to have the Jersey people down here.
Woodrow Wilson, as you may remember, was the president of Princeton and the governor of New Jersey. So what could I say to John
That's
when
right.
he twisted both arms?
So those of you that are familiar with K-12 education, you can't wait for an NSF grant because it will never come. You cannot wait for money, for that matter, because that's not out there. So you can go around like Vicki did, and you scratch the surface, or a kid comes to you, like in her case. But the thing is, that has never stopped innovative teachers. And so they'll find ways. So a couple of ways that I think we can leverage, I mentioned this before, I wanted to come back to it, is, so how do you go through these weeds and get groups of teachers? So there's organizations, multitude of national organizations and scientific societies that have these people in there. The thing that's missing in the K-12 education is a place like this, a Center for Scholarly Studies, where teachers can come together and think about what needs to happen. But we'll do the best with what we can. So in our little corner of South Jersey, across the river from Philadelphia, we do a couple of programs that were federally funded and still are. The American Meteorological Society Data Stream Program and the GLOBE program, as I mentioned before. So that wasn't necessarily in this design years ago when these organizations developed these programs, but now what has happened, looking where we are, the Data Stream program provides graduate courses for K-12 teachers in weather, climate, and oceans. There's 3 courses. They're science content oriented. They look at the subtitle in weather is Study Weather as It Happens. So this is getting data included. It's about looking outside in the world and seeing what's going on. So this is, teachable moment type of stuff. So we have these teachers that have come through this semester. In our little niche, there's about 30 students. What we did was transition those teacher students from the AMS program into the GLOBE program. Now, the GLOBE program does you can become a GLOBE certified teacher. This, can build or leverage on more, what I would call more traditional studies where students are going outside into the environment, making observations and measurements, as the title is, and putting them into a database. And this is an international program. So this all exists, scientific protocols, it's all done. There's a lot of money spent in putting that into place. But the thing is you get this group of teachers that come out, well, they seem to be interested in, there's similar type interests there. So you kind of cross-pollinate those programs. What you come out then with is these teachers that are pretty savvy, more than pretty savvy, I would say very savvy, what I would call master STEM teachers that the nations are looking for. that you have these people, and then what happens is, what we tried to do is build what we call a clubhouse. So when you mention the word clubhouse, what do you think about? A gathering place. A place where you can just be yourself. You exchange resources. You can exchange ideas. We can bring these people in. One of the things that, as I got older and towards the end of my career, one of the things that the younger people, how did you get to do that, John? Where'd you find out? How did you find out about that? Did you do that? And so they're anxious to learn. But as a teacher, I know, how I did it was stay after school 2 hours a day and just like scour things and look for things because there's no place to meet and share those ideas. So when we're together, we'll say, did you do this? Oh, you would be interested, NOAA teacher at sea, NASA's zero-G flights, and the list goes on and on. Earthwatch is going, all over the world. The program that Marcy did with NSTA, those opportunities exist for teachers. So here we have a central idea. We can bring teachers in, but then here's what happens. You have this really fantastic and often life-changing experience for 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe a month if you're a teacher out of sea, and then scattered to the wind. You go back. We work in isolation. If we could work together all the time, we could excel things quite quickly. But you work in isolation, so it's kind of like the mad scientists going back to their laboratory, and you work and get ideas. You're trying to find other people that think like you or just bounce ideas off. So I consider myself extremely fortunate that we can build this type of team here, and how we met through different programs and circumstances. So that's about building teacher leadership. And then before we go to questions or other people can chime in, I want to bring it back to emphasize why we're here on Earth Day. And the title of this, The Next Generation of Earth System Science, is to, as I mentioned before, we have a unique opportunity between the next generation standards and these STEM discussions. Something that we're promoting, GeoSTEM. I mentioned that before, but I didn't mention the name. Look at the infrastructure of programs that are out there, the hardware that's out there, the data that's out there, the learn experiences. In environmental education, there are warehouses full of ideas. Where do you see them implemented? It's hard to pick and choose. And really the energy comes from the teacher. So what I'm proposing in a think tank such as this is we need to go out and find those teachers. The teachers will make the difference. I mean, I used to upset people because they say, well, John, what do you do? What happens in your classroom? And kind of arrogantly, I used to say, whatever I feel like doing when I shut the door. And this blows the mind of curriculum writers. So how can that's, lunacy. Well, I know what the curriculum is, and I know what my content is, and we can move through that quickly, but, that's my domain. I would say the same for everybody you see here. There's ways. You do your job, and you do it well, but you're looking at that, and often that's met with a lot of pushback. All of us, almost independent of each other in conversations, have had questions. Can't you just do what we pay you to do? We had these things in New Jersey. They're called annual performance reviews. So they go over what you did, your professional development, contributions to the school community, et cetera. And I worked there a lot longer than most administrators had come and gone, and I was still there. But almost all of them would look at me and say, why do you work here? Which I guess is a backhanded compliment, but they don't get it, is that what was mentioned here, and this might be an item for discussion, is Vicky's kids may be too late, 7th graders. There's evidence in the NSF community, 5th graders are making decisions. As Kent said with your children, we beat the curiosity out of them. One of the slides I like to have for my Einstein quote is, it's a miracle that curiosity survived formal education. So you bring that out of them, and so how can we, how are we going to solve this problem? And we put it in the larger context that you look at the national scores, like the PISA scores and the TIMSS scores, and then Congress gets all excited, and why are we low performing? How can you fix these things? We're looking at new and exciting ways. So those opportunities right now exist, but I think it's a limited window. And I think that everybody that has any interest in this topic need to come together and really make their voice heard. So, the rest of you have some other things to talk about.
Would any of you like to add a comment, or are you ready for us to open it up for questions? Well, let's open it up for questions. I've got a long list of them myself. One of them was for Vicki. I was impressed, if I heard correctly, that you have a flexible template. That if I'm from, let's say, Eastern Oregon, where it's high and dry, I can really focus on where the precipitation is coming, soil conditions. Well, if I'm living in the Rocky Mountains, I can focus on where the snowfall's coming. Have I got that idea more or less?
Absolutely. It was very important when we made the program that it be that flexible, because I didn't want it to be a one-and-done type thing. I wanted it to be available to not only the rest of the communities in New Jersey, but also across, the U.S. and possibly even the world. You never know where it goes.
Something else I heard you, excuse me, we've got a question, please. Could you wait, we're going to get a microphone, and then if you could, so all the people watching can hear you clearly, and if you'd please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
I'm Maureen. I'm from the American Meteorological Society Education Program. And Vicki, I remember your email coming through about that contest, and I'm so happy you guys won.
Thank you.
My one question that I had, even when I was looking at it, is what are you guys doing to make sure that there's always integrity in the science, and that the message, as it changes with science, is flexible too, and also reviewed by, I know local meteorological service office or something like that?
Well, we're fortunate where we are that we have the Mount Holly weather station or weather service with us, but right now it's teacher-driven, it's me-driven, making sure that I give the kids all the resources that I've been shown through courses like the AMS Data Stream course and that sort of thing. Along the lines, probably in about 5 years, there's going to have to be some teacher development as well. And there's going to have to be a formal professional development program built in, not only for at our school, but other schools that are doing this as well. And I think this is where that clubhouse comes in, where we can say, okay, here you can go to discuss ideas, to stay current, to see what programs are out there. That's something that I've worried about, because you know how in so many cases the one person who starts the program, if something happens or if they go away or there's no continuity in doing that. I don't see that happening within the first 3 years, but I'm hoping by the 5-year mark we'll also have a teacher professional development, and everybody starts to buy into it as well. So.
Jen, if I may, wanted to ask you a question, taking advantage of the fact that you've really seen two different education systems. John, you mentioned that program, the PISA exam, Program International Student Assessment, where the U.S. does not do well, and by contrast, Korea does very well. Are there some secrets of the Korean system that we should emulate here?
Not sure what aspects we should emulate. I have some, let's give you a little background. I was born and raised in Korea. I think I went through 6th grade in Korea, and then I came to the States and went all the way through grad school. I had to go back to Korea for military service, that's mandatory, and served in the Air Force Academy, at the Air Force Academy in Korea, teaching, and then now I'm back here. I think they do very well on the sort of structured exam type of environment, because they just spend a lot of time. They're trained to sit there. Their normal high school hours are something like 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. all the way through, and then right after that they go to their tutoring session, come back home at 1 or 2 a.m. Process repeats over the weekend also. That sort of thing. So one thing I noticed about the Korean education system is that while they have good way of bringing the students up to the high levels of knowledge and skills. At the same time, they kind of prohibit the creativity and innovation, since they're so fixated in the fixed kind of education system. Whereas in the U.S., students get to ask why. You are not given an answer. You're encouraged to find your own answer. So in that sense, I think we're doing something right over here in that a lot of innovation and is coming out. As for getting the good test exams, we'll just have to spend more time on that.
Kent, I had a comment on that. We had a group of Korean teachers visiting NSF a couple months ago, and I asked that very same question, you know, and their answer was tiger moms. So
I know one very well.
So maybe we could have a mix of maybe some leopard moms coupled with creativity, and that would work out a little better. One of the things that you stressed directly and indirectly is that STEM education is really more important than simply providing the next generation of engineers or the next generation of technically proficient workers, that really to make decisions, informed decisions as a citizen in an ever more technological era, having that basic science and mathematics grounding is very useful and important. Do you think collectively that it also provides for a kind of resilience? I'm thinking of an oft-quoted example about Nippon Steel in Japan. Ran into international competition to the extent that it felt it could no longer usefully employ even the core employees to whom it had given a lifetime commitment. But coming out of high school, and it's a similar kind of very long day, long school year to the Korean example, they had been so well prepared in math and science that they could be retrained as programmers. That's something that, by and large, most high school students here wouldn't have that kind of resilience. Is that something that one ought to think about or even promote as an aspect of STEM education?
I'll bite.
Okay.
Yes. So when we think about educating a student, we want to think about, and we think about STEM education, I think we also have to think about the whole child. And as Vicki said, we're not just educating the science, technology, engineering, and math part of that person, but we're also looking at giving them 21st century workplace skills. And so that they can, as in the Nippon example, transfer those skills to another set of circumstances. So I think in a way it does build resiliency. And yeah, so I think that, but I also think of thinking of the whole child and the whole package of workplace skills, leadership development. Those are very transferable skills. And what I've heard, and I'm not sure where the quote comes from, but I think I've heard a quote from a business saying, we can, you know, just send us your graduate trained with these 21st century workplace skills of collaborative teamwork, being able to do presentations, data mastery. We can train them in the technical part. We can teach them that because it's going to be outdated what they learn in school anyway by the time they actually get into industry.
Well, my older son being interviewed for a job, fellow said, good education. My question for you is, can you work with people? And it sounded, Kevin and Jin, you were both emphasizing that as, in addition to the technical side of the CubeSat experience, you got the experience of learning to tell your story, the marketing team, learning to work with a variety of people on a shared goal. Is that what I heard? And that sounds to be something that would be important, not just for business, but I would think for any enterprise, not-for-profit,
Yeah.
government, et cetera.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's extremely important when you teach a student those skills or anybody those skills, they gain a self-confidence that you cannot take away from them. So if they find themselves in a situation that's not ideal later on, or perhaps where they do have to change jobs or they have to be flexible, they believe in themselves to the point where they can make that shift. And I think that's lacking in a lot of my students I see, especially a lot of the female students, is that they don't really have that self-confidence, or they're not going along that route. They're more concerned with, did I get an A? And I had a student this year who got a B for the first time, and her mother kept on emailing me and telling me that she was losing her image and self-confidence and this sort of thing. And I wrote to the mother and I said, well, isn't this the best teachable moment in the world to teach her how to deal with this setback? So I think that all these things together could really make for a great future.
I think when we discuss the CubeSats and how they apply well to GeoSTEM, a CubeSat is not a one-person, it is not a single-person science fair type project. It's not a one-off. It's a very social, it's an opportunity for a lot of social interaction. And I know Chris sitting over there, he's a coach, and if you coach sports, what's nice about the CubeSat, it relates to team sports in that not every student has to be equally good at every task, and each student should find the task that they can contribute, where their interests lie, and then that gives them a way to contribute to the team success, and it gives, you can have a victory at many different levels for the individual and for the group.
One other comment I was going to make to address your question, Kent, was that I think that the STEM opportunity, it's inherently fluid. How I like to describe the Earth, fluid and dynamic. So it's fluid. You can't learn specific skills. So you go back and say, I can tell you this story, that in my working career, this is not my life, this is my teaching career, I sat on a committee at my school to decide whether personal computers had any place in K-12 education. So, you look.
What year was that, John?
That was probably 1984. Then the internet, when that came, revolutionized things. So, maybe in this career technical education model, subscribes more to an industry model, but it's always moving. So I did things, for instance, we got a satellite receiver, and it was first in, first out, so it came in, then it left. They didn't have the storage capabilities. So I was looking at a way I could share these resources. So I spent almost 2 years of my spare time investigating, trying to develop ways where we could share data. At that time, a thermofax printer cost $10,000. That was 1988. So, and how many of those are going around K-12 schools? None. So, then you go along and you keep working and you're looking at getting NASA posters and photocopying and all this stuff. Then, boom, one day you wake up and the internet's there. So that problem's solved. But then people would come and look at me and say, well, of course, we can go to the American Meteorological Society and get all the satellite images we want, or NOAA, or NASA. Yeah, but you didn't spend 2 years, some of these gray hairs were started way back then in solving that problem. So you cannot wait, and this goes back to the teacher leader theme. The teacher leaders are moving along, solving the problems as you go. It's like being on a merry-go-round, and so it doesn't stop. It's more of a business model, and that's hard to do in the constructs of a school district, even harder within the classroom, because the kids just want to know what they need to know. The kids are pushing towards the Korean model. Just tell me what I need to know, shut up and leave me alone. And so to drag them into, no, I'm going to, make you innovative if it kills me. We're going to drag you into this innovation. And that is, I claim as America's #1 natural resource is the innovation. A group of fellows and I in 2010 went to Shanghai. We were invited there. We went with NSTA. And we talked to some of their ministers of science education. Basically, they brought us there, come into the schools to look and say, oh, look, we can get engineering students coming out our ears. They all have, perfect scores. But they're basically asking us, well, how do you teach innovation? How do you even allow that? The parents won't let them, as Jin was just saying. You try to do a project, the parents are in there screaming at you about, what are you wasting time for? Keep moving. So the teachers were talking to us about that. But the sad part is, you know, you don't have very good success rate. People are not happy. There's a high suicide rate. You look at China, will wait for us to develop things and then tell us how to do it better and more efficiently. So as a natural resource, for whatever reason, maybe it's because of the melting pot that we're, you know, a conglomeration of international peoples here, that the innovation has come through. And so in our education system, the point being is that innovation needs to be key. That's what we have. And we don't want to give that away either, in my opinion.
Well, I wanted to, being a truth in labeling, I've been very involved in FIRST Robotics for a long, long time. So I see so many of the lessons that you're talking about as emerging from FIRST Robotics as well, the kind of earned self-confidence that you see. And I should mention that the World Championships are about to take place in St. Louis over this coming weekend. So if you're in St. Louis, or want to fly to St. Louis, you'll have a great time. But the exciting thing I thought about CubeSat is that it's another opportunity for a whole group of students to have that team-based learning and the kind of earned self-confidence that Vicki was talking about, coupled with the ability to start thinking about big data, which is just proliferating. You certainly see it in the medical field, where they think they can identify in great detail elements that cause this disease or the progression of that disease. And the same certainly, of course, is true that the supermarket will know exactly what you've bought, when you've bought it, why you bought it, and they want you to buy more of it, that kind of. So there's going to be some things that may not be quite as important as the healthcare, but that's reality of how we're going to be able to have a better and clearer idea of a whole host of problems, and that ought to be the first step to some useful solutions. Well, I don't want to, oh yes, sir.
I'm Philip Allen. I'm a recovering academic administrator, but in the humanities, and I'm glad to have heard a certain number of. I'm delighted when I hear scientists border, at least, if not encroach upon the values that humanists have been defending and now have to defend themselves for. But I also heard something else which suggests that there's an elephant in the room. And maybe you covered it, or maybe you uncovered the elephant and I didn't notice it. Some administrative or structural resistance to the innovation, to the creativity, to the student-centered problem solving that seems to be entailed in at least some of your projects, if not all of them. And I wonder whether the new standards that you referred to, but without linking terribly closely to the concretes that we've been talking about, whether the new standards give teachers and school administrators any confidence that their students, their teachers, their classes will be able to satisfy that horrible bugbear. No, it's an elephant, not a bugbear, or a bugbear, not an elephant anyway, of standardized testing. Or is that where so much of the resistance comes from that might drive you crazy? I hope it doesn't.
I just want to say I was a teacher in Florida, not New Jersey. So, but if I had taught at a public school, there's a FCAT standardized test in Florida. I do not believe I could have had the opportunities to push the kids with the entrepreneurism and the aerospace and I don't think I would have had the same opportunities if I had the constraints of that standardized test beating on me every year.
Yes, I'd like to address that. When we look at structural resistance, I would have to say that test scores are right up there as the bane of innovation and creativity for teachers, especially teachers who are asked to have fidelity to their curriculum, which is a scripted curriculum, so that they know that on January 6th, they're all teaching this particular page in the curriculum. So that's the death of of teaching as an art. And test scores, well, I heard the song Chocolate Rain the other day, and in that song, Tay Zonday says, but test scores are just how much the parent makes. And you can really, I think, and it probably has been done, do a correlation with poverty and test scores. And in fact, in my school district, there are 4 schools that are on the south side of town, and United Way just put out a statistic a couple days ago that a child is being born in that district, in those 4 schools area every day, and that child has a 95% chance of growing up in poverty and a 75% chance of failing in school. So test scores are not, I would say test scores, if you ask any teacher, it's standardized test scores as a measure of student performance and of what students know and of how teachers are teaching are not accurate. If we look at education as a system, it's a very complex system, and I do agree that assessment has to happen. We want students to learn, and how do we know when they're learning? There are ways that teachers know without having to do standardized test scores. I agree that there does need to be some accountability as learning taking place. But standardized test scores and the standardized, the test that's given in New Jersey is the same test that's given in New Mexico. I'm sorry, my students are not the same as students in New Jersey. So anyway, I'm sure other teachers have opinions on that.
I don't necessarily have a solution, but I just want to acknowledge the seriousness of the problem in that I was at a national student competition, engineering high school competition a couple of days ago as a judge, and they do a great, wonderful job of coming up with this wonderful engineering solutions to the real world problems. And one of the standard questions I ask is, what kind of hardship did you have in working on this project? And 9 out of 10, they talk about how they had to go through the full sort of school curriculum, and they had to make their own time outside of the class because there's no structure within the school system to accommodate for that kind of extra activity. And they're mentioning something like 14-hour days and no weekends, things like that. And if there can be some kind of flexibility, I don't know what the solution is, but if we could sort of accommodate and harbor some of the student interest, maybe we could do better with keeping the creativity and innovation going.
I think part of the drive, I'm just going to pose another related question. Part of the drive, I think, for accountability standards and is Johnny and or Dick and Jane actually learning anything in school, is the reports that students have been lagging internationally, that we have a very high dropout rate, that there's a certain subset of students who really aren't prepared for the late 20th century, let alone for the 21st century. So how does average taxpayer know that they're really getting it?
Yeah. So here's this interesting thing about systems. Systems respond to pressure and leverage points. And you could say that the more we push standardized testing, the stupider we get. And I think you could probably I don't know if the research has been done on that, but the more standardized testing gets pushed, the less we have our critical thinking skills, the less we're able to teach problem-based, authentic lessons. So I actually do feel strongly about that. I don't think the reason that standardized tests don't measure critical thinking skills is because it's more expensive. They can be designed to measure. The College Board has done a good job of revising its AP courses to try to move towards more measurement of critical thinking skills, and so they're moving away from multiple choice questions to more open-ended questions. Now, that's an expensive test. And so, yeah, there's a cost factor in there. But in a regular multiple choice, tell me what you learned and just recite these facts.
I'd like to point out Dr. Suresh, the former director of NSF, he made an interesting statement, and it ties in with what you asked and what John mentioned about his quote about curiosity surviving formal education. Dr. Suresh used to talk about a leaky STEM pipeline, where we have lots of kids at the front end, but it's very porous, and we lose them at different places. Standardized, the pressure to perform well on the standardized tests may falsely indicate to some kids that they maybe should choose a different career path. There are all these signals that the children get as they're coming up through the system. We should think about how we can patch some of these holes in the pipeline. We may have enough kids that are interested in STEM in the 3rd grade, but as you mentioned about girls and their interest as they approach junior high, how do we retain them and not lose them? That's actually a very good question, I think. Standardized tests do not contribute to patching the leaks in the STEM pipeline.
Just to also mention one other thing about how we assess our students. I went to a workshop this recently where it was a workshop on proficiency, grading for proficiency, or grading, or sometimes called standards-based assessment, which is different than standards-based testing, but it's standard-based assessment. And really what we want our students to do is we want them to gain a certain level of proficiency, a certain level of knowledge. So why don't we let them gain that level of knowledge before we move them on to the next level? So for instance, in math, I think what happens a lot is that in middle school, kids get to a certain level in math and they don't get it. And if you don't get it in Algebra 1 at a certain level, you can't go on to geometry and you can't go on to Algebra 2. But what they do is they get a failing grade and then they're labeled as losers. Their self-esteem suffers, and so we have this grading system that's set up for winners and losers, as opposed to let's change our grading system so that we give students multiple opportunities to gain proficiency, and to gain mastery of the subject before they move on. And there are challenges with that system as well, especially for the teacher in managing a whole classroom of students who are at different levels in their learning progression.
2 things that I did this year that tie into that. One was I allowed retesting for the first time. Now there's a whole thought process that goes into allowing students to retest, but the perfect example is a student who started out with a D. He worked hard, retested, got a C, came back to me and said, "Do you think if I work harder, I could take the test again?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And he worked harder and got a C, and then started to feel better and better about himself and started to change his work habits a bit, and again started believing in himself and having that self-confidence. So now, once a non-believer in retesting, I do believe in giving students opportunities to learn, because especially in 7th grade, the maturity level is different. You don't know that a student is not working hard at it, or they just can't get it because they're not educationally or intellectually mature enough to get it. The other thing I did this year, which is interesting, some of you may already have done this if you're educators, is I flipped my classroom. And my students now listen to my lectures at night by video. It's the first time they're exposed to that information. They come in the next day, and what I would have normally assigned for homework, we actually do in the classroom. And I now can spend one-on-one time with my special ed students or those that are having difficulty. I let the students teach other students if they get the material themselves. Parents are not crazy because they're trying to help their students with homework assignments that they can't figure out what is going on. And parents are actually sitting down with their students and listening, or with their children and listening to the videos. And they're now getting a rekindled excitement about science, and wow, I didn't really understand that when I was in 7th grade, but now I do. So there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this, but I think we do have to take a look at the standardized testing, especially since science falls 3rd on the rung, because everybody's concerned about, at least in New Jersey, math and language arts, and science gets pushed to the side all the time. So it's frustrating.
So thank you for